out their home state? Big pardon? Oregon, 0. South Dakota, 0.
Yeah.
But again, I bet you a lot of those warriors are probably born in South Dakota. Well, New York was the #1 state that Custer's men was born in, but the #1 place Custer's men was born, Ireland, at 128 of Custer's 600 men born in Ireland. 125 of them were born in Germany. There are 53 from England. There are 15 Canadians, 7 Italians, 8 Swiss, 6 Danes, 2 Swedes, 1 Spaniard, 1 Russian, 1 Greek, 2 Hungarians, 2 Poles, 2 Norwegians, and 2 of these soldiers were born at sea. So that tells us a lot about Custer's 600 men out here on this battlefield. Almost half of them were immigrants. They weren't born here in America. They came over from Europe looking to start a new life in the United States. And a perfect example of this type of immigrant was Charles Windolph. Charles Windolph was born over in Germany, and he's going to grow up on a farm, and he's going to flee Germany and come to the United States for fear of getting drafted into the German army. Charles is going to land in New York. He's going to start looking for a job, and he's going to see signs in the streets that say, or signs in the shops that say, Irish need not apply, or the Germans need not apply. So a lot of racism and a lot of prejudice happening back in America back in 1876. So for a lot of these immigrants, their only choice was to join the army. And an older German immigrant who fought in the Civil War, or war between the states, depending on where you're from, told Charles, join the army. That's going to be your best bet to make it here in America. You sign up for 5 years. It's going to give you more than enough time to learn the English language, become accustomed to the way these Americans do things. The Army's going to feed you. The Army's going to clothe you. The Army's going to give you a place to sleep. Well, Charles Windolph doesn't have any other choice except to sign that line for 5 years of service in the Army. It's either the Army or starve to death on the East Coast. So Charles signs on that dotted line for 5 years in the United States Army. And Charles will be assigned to Company H of the United States 7th Cavalry, stationed out at Fort Abraham Lincoln, which is in Bismarck, North Dakota. Charles Windolph, as a private, is being exploited by the government as a cheap labor source. Charles Windolph is spending most of his day out in the hot sun harvesting hay for the horses. Or maybe he's building a new barracks for the incoming company. Or maybe he's building stables. The government is using these soldiers as a cheap source of labor. When these soldiers actually got to go out of the fort and go out onto the frontier and fight those warriors, that was something that those soldiers looked forward to. Excitement, that was a change in the routine, a break in the monotony. But otherwise, life out here on the frontier is extremely boring. There's no women out here for these soldiers in the Army. The only women out here on the frontier are the wives and daughters of the officers. And the enlisted men are not allowed anywhere near the wives and daughters of the officers. So you have 40 to 60 guys living in one barracks together. This is going to be that Charles's family. He's going to take all his meals with these 40 soldiers. He's going to sleep together with these 40 soldiers, and they're going to be his family. And each company at that fort is going to have 2 women working for that company. They're going to be the company's laundresses. Now they're going to do all the laundry for those 50 or 60 soldiers in that company. And you can imagine how popular these ladies were on the post. Now let's say Company H wants to throw a party. They want to have a grand ball, a dance, just to break up the monotony. It's boring out here, so you're going to throw a party. And Company H will invite all the company laundresses at Fort Abraham Lincoln. The night of the dance will arrive, then all those soldiers will take a bath, they'll polish up all that brass on their uniforms, they'll brush their teeth, comb their hair, go strutting into the dance hall, which is their barracks. He sees 50 of his fellow soldiers and maybe 5 ladies there at the dance. So if he's going to be standing in line, or he's going to be standing in line waiting for that dance for quite a long time. But that's okay, because the head sergeant is going to come along and he's going to say, okay, privates, you, and you, here's your white ribbon. And these designated privates would tie a white ribbon around their arm, And now those privates with the ribbon are now women. And those privates would dance all the dances and sing all the songs that a woman would normally do at this dance. Now this is the type of behavior that is frowned upon in today's military, but 125 years ago, you had to do with the resources that you had. Now, Charles Windolph came out onto the campaign of 1876 with George Custer. Charles Windolph fought at this battle 125 years ago. But he was one of the lucky ones. Charles Windolph was 5 miles south of here with Major Reno and Captain Benteen. Charles Windolph will survive the battle with about 350 of his fellow soldiers. And while the battle is being fought 5 miles south of here, those soldiers are trapped up on a high hill. They are surrounded by the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne warriors. The officers have got several wounded and dying men up on top of that hill, and those wounded soldiers are screaming and begging for water. So a call is going to go out for volunteers. We want some of you soldiers to sneak down off of this hill, get down to the river, fill up as many canteens, pots, and kettles as you can with water, and then bring that water back up onto the hill, and we're going to give that water to relieve the suffering of the dying and wounded. Well, Charles Windolph decides that's a great idea. I volunteer for that. The officers saw Charles and they said, Charles, you're such a good shot with that rifle. Instead of being a water carrier, we're going to put you out there on an exposed ridge in front of God and everybody. And you're going to be the sitting duck. All those warriors are going to be trying to kill you while all your buddies sneak down that ditch to get water for the dying and wounded. Well, I imagine Charles Windolph said to himself, that's the last time I'm volunteering for anything. But Charles is in the Army. He's going to follow his orders. He's going to go out onto that exposed ridge and lay down cover fire for the water carriers. Arrows are going to be landing all around him. Bullets are going to be whizzing past his head. The water carriers will make it down to the river. They'll fill up their canteens, and they'll all scurry back up to the top of that hill and give their water to the dying and wounded soldiers up there. And every one of those water carriers, including Charles Windolph, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for bravery and valor at this battlefield. And we have Charles Windolph's Medal of Honor on display in the museum up there in the Visitor Center. Well, Charles Windolph survives this battle. He finishes up his 5 years in the Army. He moves into the Black Hills of South Dakota and starts mining in a lead mine. He gets married, he starts making babies, he starts living the American dream. Charles Windolph did not die off of old age until 1950. Not too bad, wouldn't you say, for a man who left his home country in Europe to avoid being drafted. Charles Windolph's story is typical. He was one of those immigrants. Almost half of these soldiers out here on this battlefield are immigrants. They showed up on the East Coast looking to start a new life in America, and they couldn't find a job. It was either starve to death on the East Coast or join the Army. So these soldiers are not riding out here because they have the sole intention of murdering women and children. Okay? Not these immigrants. They're out here because they're following orders. They're being fed and clothed by the United States Army. They're doing their job. Now, that's the Army. Let's talk about the Native Americans here for a while. And specifically what I'd like to talk about is the horse buffalo culture. And we all know exactly what that is, even if we can't put a label on it. That's Dances with Wolves. That's every John Wayne movie ever made. That's all we see on TV, on the History Channel, on public television, on the Discovery Channel. That horse buffalo culture. Warriors and Native Americans living in teepees, following the buffalo, having the horses, shooting arrows, and maybe they have guns and whatnots, pots and pans to cook in, glass beads, all that beautiful beadwork. That culture that we are so familiar with, that horse buffalo culture, only lasted 200 years, which was a very, very short time in the global scheme of things. The horse is not indigenous to the North American continent. It was Columbus that brought the first horses over to America. So what do you think the Plains Indians were using as their beast of burden before they got the horse? Who said that? Well, let's see a hand. You had the right answer. Take pride. You're very right. It was the dogs. The dogs were the beast of burden. I'm very proud of you all. Nobody said women. We'll get to the ladies here in just a minute. But you're exactly right, sir. It's the dog. And in Native American Sign Language, the symbol for dog is this symbol right here. When the horse arrives into the Americas, the Native Americans called the horse the sacred dog, because the horse came out and revolutionized the entire culture. And the reason this is the symbol for dog is because that's that dog dragging all the Native Americans' belongings across the open plains and something like this. This is what is called a travois. We would call it a luggage rack in today's modern language. And what you're going to do is you're going to have your dog right in front of you. You're going to take this padded part of the travois, set that on the dog's back, tie the travois to the dog, put all your belongings on the travois, and then that dog is going to drag your stuff across the open plains to your next destination. Remember, you're following the buffalo. You're nomadic. So before contact with the white man, they didn't have any horses out here. It was all dogs. So the horse comes out onto the Great Plains and revolutionizes the entire culture. You can go a lot further on the back of a horse than you can with a dog, right? It's a lot easier to hunt the buffalo on the back of a horse than it is on your own 2 feet. Your range of mobility is increased. It's a little bit easier to go hunting now. And the horse can carry a lot more than the dog. So now you can have a lot more personal belongings. So the horse comes out onto the Great Plains, revolutionizes the entire culture. Right after the horse, unfortunately, here come the diseases. Smallpox, cholera, all sorts of mean and nasty germs come out here and decimate entire tribes. And then right after the diseases, here come the explorers. Mackenzie, Lewis and Clark, Pike. These men are going to come out, they're going to map the territory. And then right after the explorers, who comes next?
Settlers?
Not the settlers, close though.
Trappers.
Beg pardon?
Trappers.
Trappers, exactly right. The fur trade is going to come out here. And the fur trade industry and the Plains Indians out here had very, very good relations. There was very, very little bloodshed in the early 1800s. The Plains Indians were getting exactly what they wanted from these fur traders. And the fur traders were getting exactly what they wanted from the Plains Indians. Now the fur traders came out here with all these neat and wonderful and interesting products that the Plains Indians just loved. How about an iron arrowhead? Okay? Before contact with the white man, the Plains Indians didn't have any of these iron arrowheads. No Plains tribe out here in America digs up its own ore, melts it down, and turns it into usable products. Everything we see associated with the Plains Indians that is metal, they would have picked that up at the trading post. And by 1876, the year of this battle, the entire Plains Indians culture has been revolutionized, and they are all using iron arrowheads. There are no stone arrowheads used at this battle 125 years ago. Why would you want to tie a piece of rock onto your arrow shaft when there are literally thousands of these metal ones floating around the Great Plains? How about this right here, the tomahawk? This is a typical weapon of the horse buffalo culture. This is something we would expect to see Kevin Costner with in Dances with Wolves, or something John Wayne would take off of a warrior. This is the same thing that we see in the museums. But if we look at this, it's not very Native American at all. Got an iron axe head right there. So where'd they get it? Trading post. Exactly right. Brass tacks is the decoration. That's metal. So they got that at the trading post, right? How about this red cloth? The cotton is grown in the southern United States, shipped over to England. It's woven into the fabric. It's dyed and shipped back over to America. And it's called trade cloth. How about these glass beads? This beautiful, elaborate, gorgeous beadwork that we always associate with the Plains Indians. Folks, those glass beads are manufactured in Italy. So before the traders, or before the white man got out here onto the Great Plains, they didn't have these glass beads to decorate everything with. So we look at this weapon here, it's a poster child of Plains Indians, Native Americans, but it's not very Native American at all, is it? Before contact with the white man, the Plains Indians would have had this same weapon, it just would have looked different. Instead of an iron axe head, you'd have a rock. Same shape, same size, just as sharp, just as effective. Instead of the red trade cloth and the brass tacks, you may have bunny fur on there and some other sort of decoration hanging off the weapon. But this is the weapon that we always see in our mind, that we're always shown on TV, that we're always taught about in school. But this is a result of the fur trade. Okay, they did not have anything that looked like this before the contact with the white man. How about something even a little bit more basic? Ladies, this is what the Plains Indians women would cook in. This is a buffalo stomach, and this is their pot. What they would do is they would fill the stomach up with water, hang the stomach over the fire, and then they're going to take red hot rocks that have been sitting in the fire all day long. They're going to pick those red hot rocks up and they're going to drop them down in the stomach. And then those hot rocks are going to cook whatever you have in there. Your beef or your meat, your vegetables, your soup, your stew, whatever you're cooking. You bring that to a boil and then you serve your meal. And then there's no pot or pan to clean up because you eat the stomach. And you all can still get buffalo stomach soup. It's called tripe. You can get it right down at the restaurant right here at the bottom of the hill if you're interested. Tripe. Some of you may already had it. How many of y'all have had a hot dog in the past month? You had a cow stomach there, folks. You've had tripe. So, before contact with the white man, you got a buffalo stomach to cook in. After the white man, pots and pans. The Plains Indians, the women out here just loved these pots and pans. Here's something that you can use over and over and over again. So it's metal, so that's after contact with the white man. They didn't have any metal products before the white man came out here. This is a saddlebag made out of the skin of a deer or a buffalo. You can see the red, white, and blue beads on this saddlebag. But what do you think the Plains Indians were decorating everything with before they got these glass beads? Porcupine quills. Exactly right. They could also use seashells or various other items. But on this saddlebag, you see these horizontal lines that are going across the bag? That's porcupine quill. That's quill working. And quill working was almost lost to history because the traders came out here with these glass beads, and the women out on the Great Plains went, wow, look at all those bright, vibrant colors. I couldn't get those colors from nature, and now I can do all these fancy patterns that I couldn't do with the porcupine quills. I ain't doing any more quill working. I'm doing nothing but bead working. And so quill working was almost lost to history because all the women out here converted almost exclusively to those glass beads. And quill working is just now starting to make a comeback. Very time-consuming, very elaborate way to decorate your belongings. And y'all are looking at this saddlebag going, so what? You take a porcupine quill, big deal. Stick it in the skin, fold it around, bring it out the other side, make it in a straight line. Anybody can do that. Well, if y'all see the pattern on the outside of this saddlebag, those horizontal lines, that's the quill working. But you see the pattern on the outside of the bag, but if I turn this bag inside out, there is no pattern. That porcupine quill never broke the skin of this animal. Oh my God. That's what makes quill working so special and so elaborate. This is the patterns on the outside, but there's absolutely nothing on the inside of the saddlebag. The women are going to be doing most of this artwork. If it's a geometric pattern, horizontal lines, red, white, and blue patterns, the women did that type of artwork. If it's a geometric pattern, the women did that piece of art. The men are going to draw pictures. We've all seen these before in the history books and on TV. So what they call a pictograph robe. And the warrior is going to want one of these things. And he's going to paint himself doing all of those brave and honorable things that he's done in battle. And so he can wear this around the village. And then everybody can see everything that he's done to protect the village. And then he can brag about himself to all his buddies. He can say, yeah, that's that soldier we killed at the Battle of the Rosebud. We're over here. That's where we took the American flag from Custer at the Battle of the Greasy Grass. This is for the warrior's honorable war deeds. This is his bragging rights. That warrior is not going to paint himself running away from an enemy tribe or running away from the United States Army. That's not going to be something he's going to want to be talking about. This is only for his honorable war deeds. So the men draw pictures, the women do geometric patterns. Now let's talk about the ladies here for just a minute. I promised we'd talk about them. Who do you think owns the teepee? The man or the woman?
The woman.
It's the women, actually. The women own the teepee, not the men. When a woman wants a divorce from her husband, there are no lawyers, there are no courts, there's no paperwork. She simply tosses his belongings out the front door. Another story. Who sets up the teepee, the man or the woman?
The woman.
The woman. The man doesn't know how. And no man in his right mind is going to help his wife set up that teepee. That's a woman's work. He'd be the laughing stock of the village for years to come. And the woman didn't want his help. He was just going to screw it up anyhow. A woman and her sister could get a teepee just like this, up and functioning. I mean, with a fire in the center, buffalo robes down on the ground as your carpeting, your lazy boy recliners in the back, up and functioning in less than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
When me and my ranger buddies take the teepees down so they can mow the grass, we get out here, try and put them back up. It takes us about 45 minutes because we don't know what we're doing. And more often than not, there's a group of Native Americans standing in the parking lot pointing and laughing at us because it's woman's work. Men aren't supposed to be doing that. How about transporting the teepee and all the belongings from one campsite to the other? Does the woman do that or does the man do that? The women. Who does all the cooking?
Women.
Women. Who raises all the children?
Women.
Women. Who makes all the clothes?
Women.
Women. Women tan all the hides. Right? What do the warriors do?
Hunt.
Brag.
Very good. They protect and they hunt. And they are also responsible for most, but not all, of those religious ceremonies. So they protect, they hunt, and they pray. That's the warrior's 3 responsibilities right there. And in most villages, the women are going to outnumber the men. There's more women in these tribes than there are men. Hunting and going off to war, that's dangerous occupations. And a lot of these young men lose their lives at an early age. So it's not uncommon for one man to have more than one wife. And the first wife usually doesn't have a problem with this. Because if the man marries a second wife, good. Now that first wife has got some help with all those chores. She's got somebody to help set up that teepee. She's got somebody to talk to while they're tanning those hides. So without the women, the tribe would simply cease to exist. Now, that's the horse buffalo culture. That's what we always see on TV. That's what we always hear about in school. Started in about 1750. That's when the horse arrived onto the Great Plains. The explorers, the fur traders come out, revolutionized the culture, and by 1881, all of those nomadic tribes that were living the horse buffalo culture have been forced onto the reservation. So from 1750 to 1881 is when we have the horse buffalo culture. Roughly about 200 years. A very, very short period in global history. Now folks, we've been spending a lot of time out here talking about 1876. There's one thing I want you to remember about the Army, is that's almost half of Custer's 600 men out here on this battlefield were immigrants. Okay, they weren't even born here in America. The Plains Indians, that horse buffalo culture, John Wayne, Dances with Wolves, That culture only lasted 200 years. And I'd like to leave you all with this story. One of the soldiers up on top of Last Stand Hill at the time of the battle, his name is George C. Brown. He was born here in the United States of America in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, excuse me. He was one of those P words. He joined the Army for the adventure. He was one of those Americans that wanted to see the West, signed up for the United States Army. He was so good at his job, he was promoted from within the ranks, from private to corporal. Those soldiers get $13 a month. And George C. Brown decided that he wanted to buy himself a brand new pocket watch for his brand new stripes on his arm. The watch cost him almost $45. He had to save up 3 months worth of pay to buy that pocket watch. George C. Brown, we would consider him to be a goody two-shoes by today's standards. He was a candy maker by profession, and he wrote several letters home to his friends and family. And he complained about his bunkmates, the other soldiers in the 7th Cav. They swore too much. They drank. They gambled. They were impolite to the women. George Brown has got the same thing on his mind as any young man in his 20s. He's interested in girls. He's asking his friend, well, have you seen this young lady, that young lady? Tell her I said hello. George C. Brown up there on that hill towards the end of the battle is completely surrounded by the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne warriors. They're getting closer and closer and closer. And towards the end of the battle, Company E will make a charge right off of that hill headed towards Deep Ravine, which is the big ditch out there on the battlefield. George C. Brown was part of that company, and his body was found down in that ravine by his best friend, who was over at the Reno-Benteen battlefield. It was Charles Windolph. He survived the battle. The warrior Crazy Horse had a cousin. His name was Black Elk. He was about 13 years old at the time of the battle. When the battle was over, Black Elk, with many other warriors, charged onto the battlefield looking to pick up a new rifle and some ammunition off of one of those dead soldiers. Black Elk said he saw a soldier's body in a deep ditch. Black Elk said he wanted that soldier's blue coat, so he started to strip that soldier of the coat. And an older Lakota warrior saw Black Elk with that brand new blue coat as war trophy. And the older warrior is going to come up and shove Black Elk to the ground and yank that coat away from Black Elk. Black Elk's just a child. He didn't do anything at the battle. I'm a real warrior. I deserve that war trophy. And the older warrior is going to go running off into the sunset. Black Elk will get up off the ground, brush the dust off of him. He's going to look back down at that body that he just stripped. Black Elk said he saw something bright and shiny hanging off the soldier's belt. And he picked that bright and shiny object off, and he noticed that it made a sound, a ticking sound. He didn't realize what it was, but he said it made a good necklace. And Black Elk said it was years before somebody taught him how to make that bright and shiny object make the sound again. Or it took years for somebody to teach Black Elk how to wind that watch. Was it George C. Brown's watch? Same people? We don't know. Probably not. But if we use that watch that belonged to George C. Brown, or the watch that Black Elk found, and we use that watch and look back in time 125 years ago, we can see the causes of this battle: greed, racism, prejudice, ethnocentrism. And hopefully we can get on the other side of this watch and look into the future and see a lot less of all of those things, and we can all say that we have learned something from the Battle of the Little Bighorn. We're a battlefield where Americans were killing Americans. Folks,